Welcome everybody to Los Altos Hills Town Hall. I'm Breen Kerr, I'm the mayor of Los Altos Hills, and we're just happy to host this event here tonight. Some of you that are from town may know that this building and the sort of complex here is something that we're very proud of, and we're happy to have an event like this here. This project was an interesting one. It's got a number of sustainable features. We focused a lot on energy savings by design when we were building the facility. And there's some wonderful programs now. The PG&E Energy Savings by Design program, by the way, is now applicable to private homes. So if you're building something or maybe remodeling, I encourage you to check into it, because we ended up saving about 30% of our energy consumption here just on design changes. And then if it was daytime, I'd show you the solar energy component. We have a 30,000 kilowatt on-site solar power plant that supplies about 2/3 of electricity for this facility. Of course, we keep having events like this, and that's dropping our percentage down a little bit. So we have to have some way to run these lights when the sun's not shining. But anyway, I'm just so happy to have Hidden Villa here tonight, and to have Andy here. We've tried to draw upon our past here in Los Altos Hills and create an environment where we maintain the legacy of many of the early environmental leaders that helped found the town. And so this is just one example of some of the things that we try to do to continue that legacy. So right now I'd like to ask Beth Ross, the Executive Director of Hidden Villa, to come up and introduce Andy. And thanks very much for coming.
I need to bring us down just a little bit. Thank you, Breen. It's so exciting for Hidden Villa to be able to co-host our guests tonight in this beautiful green building here in Los Altos Hills. We are so excited to have Andy here. Andy's been an environmentalist for a very long time. I understand he was inspired as a 15-year-old camper in the San Bernardino Mountains when he noticed the many dead and dying pine trees. So he and his fellow campers took action right away by planting trees in an old parking lot. And at that time he realized that individuals and communities can really make a difference. He went on from there to found TreePeople, an award-winning environmental organization in Los Angeles. And hey, if they can do this in Los Angeles, we can do it in the Bay Area, and be a beacon as well for environmental sustainability. So please welcome Andy Lipkis.
Well, thank you for the really warm welcome, and it is really, really a pleasure and an honor to be in this room and to be in this building that's a green building. And it's very strange to hear my voice over this system. So it makes me feel like I have a cold, and I guess I'll get used to that. I'm going to put a timer on so I wanted to leave time for a bit of discussion at the end, so I'm going to try to give myself a warning shot in about 20 minutes to wrap up the formal, which will hopefully not be very formal, part of this. I got the dress code wrong, I'm sorry. My notes said after I packed and after I was on a plane, I read the note that said informal. And all I had, aside from this, was a sweatsuit, and I figured I better get a little more dress for you. It is truly an honor to be here with you, and I feel like bringing coals to Newcastle, because the fundamentals of this community are green. I probably don't need to teach or preach anything to you, but I hope to bring you some hope tonight. But let me just start off by thanking Hidden Villa and the city of Los Altos Hills for putting this together and hosting this. I want to give special acknowledgement to Diane Hunt, who's a former TreePeople staff member who's now the development director of Hidden Villa, and if it wasn't for her, I probably wouldn't be here. And so, as I said, I have plenty of stories to tell, but I was scratching my head saying, what can I possibly bring to you when I look up north from down south, and always admire the vision and the leadership that is going on here. So I hope that some of the story tonight will give you a sense of hope and encouragement to keep up the fight, because there's a long way to go and a lot of challenge for all of us. I recently returned from China in September, where I had been summoned with a few other people from Los Angeles by urban planners in China who they're waking up. As we know, the country is waking up, but they are waking up to the challenge of sustainability. And it's interesting because I speak in cities all around this country about the need to reverse the force and the power of cities that are so destructive to the planet. And there's certainly a growing awareness, but American cities and American city management are often pretty reluctant to hear the message. And it hasn't yet sunk in at all. And in China, it was really quite refreshing to be meeting with the Minister of Forestry and all his top staff and the Vice Minister of their EPA equivalent, who had a couple messages that were really, really interesting to hear. And they were so on point that I wondered if they'd read all our websites and notes and were just parroting it back. And maybe that's the case, but it really did seem to be genuine. And here's the news. They get it. They understand that in their waking up, that they are becoming, by their sheer magnitude, one of the more dangerous forces on the planet to themselves, as well as the rest of us. They see where we've gone, and now they're working to re-engineer a new path that is more sustainable. They get the point that I'm going to be telling you. I guess I'm giving you the conclusion up front that there is a pathway to sustainability, and it is through integrated ecosystem management. That's a mouthful of jargon, but reintegrating what we have disintegrated, and that's what I'm going to be showing you. The hitch was they said that Chinese don't tend to innovate. They copy. And they like what we've done here, with the story I'm going to tell you, and basically left with the message, you need to succeed, and succeed quick so we can copy it faster. And as I said, that was probably my conclusion, but since I didn't rehearse this, let me just jump in. Cities, we've built large cities. I got to exclude Los Altos Hills because it's not a very large city, and I think you're probably more integrated by sheer size that people can talk to each other or themselves and make decisions. But large cities have truly disintegrated the environment by creating bureaucracies to be more efficient. And most cities were created before there was an understanding of the environment, before there was a word of knowledge about ecosystem, and engineers just took systems and built things. And when you get to the size of a city like Los Angeles, it is one of the most unsustainable cities on the planet by the amount of energy we use, the amount of water we use, what we do to the climate. And plenty of other cities are following us. So let me start there and then say that the story I'm going to tell starts, I guess, in parallel with why I'm here with, in a partnership for tonight with Hidden Villa, who works with kids. You go, well, how can kids be a force that can stop the level of destruction that we all face? And yet, there's tremendous power in that, and it's the power to make change. It's the power to change adults. It's the power to change cities and turn them around. And in that, there's hope. So let's go to the great evil force that we know. This is Southern California, Los Angeles, where I was born and raised. You're looking in the dark areas. I don't have a laser pointer with me, but that's LA's watershed. All the way up into Wyoming, rainfall that falls there comes out of our tap so I can brush my teeth or water my lawn or wash my car. And not just me, but about 18 million others of us in all of Southern California. It's nuts because Los Angeles in a typical rainfall year receives about half the water it needs. But the city was designed not from that ecosystem knowledge, but as a sink or a basin instead of understanding a watershed or a forest. And so right now 2/3 of Los Angeles is paved. The soil is sealed, it's covered over, and so when it rains, the water rushes off. What you're looking at is the Los Angeles River during a rainstorm, and that's not atypical. The water rushes quickly to the river, picks up all the pollution that we've put on our driveways, on our streets, anywhere on the ground, and carries it quickly to the storm drains, to the river, to the beach, where the beaches are fouled. And we have a city that is paying a lot for this, and the citizens don't see it, most people don't see it. We pay a lot to bring in all the water. We pay a tremendous amount to get rid of this rainfall. When we pollute the water and send it to the beach, not only are we poisoning the people who eat and rely on the local fish that are getting poisoned, but the toxins are going beyond Los Angeles as they move through currents in the ocean. And we pay fines. And so this is a definition of unsustainability, and here's sort of a chart of it. I think you can read. In the back, can you see? Great. That would be great. I love getting to see you. I don't usually get to see an audience, but what you're seeing in this picture, all the circles are different agencies, they're different turf, they're different silos of government, and they make sense from how you manage, because one person can't do everything, except maybe in a city like this. Your city, what's your title? City clerk, who made sure I had water and made sure the projector works, so that's great. But in large cities, everything's been broken into different bureaucracies, and that worked for deploying people. It didn't work for managing and seeing an ecosystem. And let me just show you this as an illustration of unsustainability. Water supply is that blue circled on the bottom left side. Los Angeles spends, oh, thank you very much. First button. First button. What does the second one do? Okay, so when I said we receive about half the water we need in rainfall, that is handled by this agency over here, flood control. Their job is to get rid of the rainfall. That they were built under the premise that was the mission of the Army Corps of Engineers, and it used to be to keep water and people apart for safety. The water supply system was built to bring water to people. Los Angeles spends, does anybody know, maybe some of you, I know some faces here, so some of you have seen me speak, but does anybody know how much LA spends on its water in a year? It's $1 billion. So LA City, not just the county, which is 88 cities, but just the city of LA, its water budget is roughly $1 billion. And we're bringing in more than half of what we need, bringing a lot from here, from the Bay Area. So we spend $1 billion. We receive in rainfall about $500 million worth of water, but we throw almost all of it away. And the flood control budget, different agency, in fact, it's at the county level, they spend $500 million a year to get rid of the rainfall and pollute it. Both the city and the county receive fines for violating Clean Water Act. From a forester's perspective, there's more to it than that, because, well, you guys are living up here near forests. What's on the ground, falls under trees, is mulch. It's leaves. It's this rich, wonderful. I'm a chef, and I keep mixing up hummus with humus. wonderful humus. And that's a flood control device, a water quality device. It's in conjunction with the tree. It's a miracle device. But when you're a city official that runs the third largest budget after police and fire, 40% of your problem is leaves and mulch. 40% of LA's waste stream is green waste, is mulch. About 2% of the gardens in Los Angeles are mulched. So a large flow of money and resources and equipment are deployed around mowing, blowing, and hauling this beautiful stuff that we so badly need to the landfill. Are they ever at the table when we're talking about water supply or water quality? No. They just keep on doing their thing. We spend more and more money on stormwater pollution mitigation, air quality. Energy is $2 billion. So this is the story with most cities and how they're deployed. It's a model of sustainability. It's a model that creates a lot of human pain and suffering, not just environment. When we hemorrhage that much cash, we hemorrhage jobs, we hemorrhage economic opportunity, and opportunity for people. It's nice to say that, but what's going to move us to do something about it? Having grown up in LA, and why am I talking about this when I'm a tree planter? Because we plant trees to try to make a city livable. That means not just clean air and water and sustainable. It means jobs. It means opportunity and safety. And when we look at big cities and what resources are hemorrhaging out and how people are being in pain because of the loss of resources, began to look at what we could do to fix it. And the more we planted trees, the more people thought, oh, that's great, you're decorating the city. Just decorating the city. And that's tantamount to, rearranging the deck chairs as the ship is going down. And increasingly, I'd find myself screaming that that's not what we're doing, that's not what we're doing. Well, I've been doing this work since 1970. We got really good at planting trees and involving communities and creating their own neighborhood forests. But in 1992, LA got hit by riots, the Rodney King riots. And aside from the legal issues and the whole Rodney King thing that was the spark that ignited the fumes were created by a tremendous amount of lack of employment, a lot of unhappiness, and a lot of pain. After the riots, every sociologist who studied LA said we needed 50,000 new jobs for urban youth. Somehow, we needed to find $500 million to create those jobs, and we couldn't really do it. And I started scratching my head, saying, well, if we're planting trees to help people, how are we connecting these things? And I began to ask the question about sustainability and began to find answers and in looking at this model. And everywhere I looked, I found that $500 million. $500 million worth of water coming in that we were throwing away, spending $500 million. And just when I began to give up hope, because we could only get like $13 million out of the Forest Service for some jobs in LA after the riots, $500 million showed up. And it was brought to us by the Army Corps of Engineers. And they were doing it because they discovered that LA was so overpaved that the river that you saw those pictures of could no longer handle a 50-year storm. And they expected that the river south of Los Angeles would overflow and take out the southern half of the county. So they came in with $500 million of emergency funds to make the walls of the river 2 to 10 feet higher. Or find some place to build a dam. Nowhere in their thinking was, this is a watershed, let's manage it as such. Thank you. We laughed, we cried. And I started to challenge them to say, look, we could remove the concrete and put in more trees, and they're scratching their heads saying that's never going to work, won't work, can't happen. And I started debating the kernel of the core, and he would get up in front of audiences like this and say, in his uniform, our mission is to keep water and people apart. And I would come up in a completely different paradigm, and a collision of paradigms, and I would say, our mission is to inspire people to take personal responsibility for the environment. Chalk and cheese, oil and water. They couldn't get it. It didn't make sense to them. And I had to go out on a deep path to prove that actually that it might be feasible. And what we said needed to happen was to bring all those separate agencies together to talk to each other and to begin to look at the city as if it was a living ecosystem and to see what the connections were to stop the hemorrhaging of water and of resources and of lives. And because when you bring the integration, you start getting flood prevention. If we start putting in more trees and mulch, one of the things we did was a little bit of research on just how powerful a tree is if it's planted right, cared for right. This area here is surrounded by oak trees. You know, if you just move into the hills, a place that's undisturbed, and dig under an oak, you can dig down 2-3 feet in the leaves and in the mulch. And that's habitat for things that drill holes in the soil, and from microscopic organisms to snakes and rodents. And they drill under those leaves and condition soil, and you get an area that's about 5 feet deep of sponge. It's a tank. It's a water processing machine. Under a tree, I don't know how common they are here, but in Southern California we still have a few heritage oaks with a canopy of around 100 feet in diameter. One of those oaks in its natural setting, 100 feet in diameter, with the mulch underneath, 3 feet deep, 2 feet of conditioned soil, guess how much water is held in that tank? According to the U.S. Forest Service, who did the calcs for us, that tree, that tank and sponge, has the capacity to hold 57,000 gallons in a 12-inch storm. Not just it grabs it, the tree slows it down, it comes into the soil filters it, pollutants are scrubbed out, and the water's put into the aquifer and the water supply. Take out that one tree, and you got a flood, you got a loss of soil, you got pollutants. That system is an incredibly engineered device. Well, we don't have room to put 100-foot diameter trees and mulch all over cities anymore, but we do have the ability to combine trees, mulch, and then engineering systems like cisterns and things like that that mimic what nature does and works in partnership with it. And that's what I started trying to tell the Army Corps was possible. I mean, it's being done in Europe, it's being done in other countries, it's being done on farms. Why not in the city? Well, they didn't believe us. We actually had to sue their local partner, the county, to get them to consider watershed management. They didn't. By the way, it's in Article 10 of the state's constitution prohibits the waste of the state's water. And we went to a judge to say, you know, this is an incredible waste. And kind of like Homeland Security, they said, no, we need flood protection much more than that, and really didn't get it. So I went out and brought a bunch of different federal and state and local agencies together. They all contributed a small amount of money so we could try to prove this. And it's taken 8 years, and it's really begun to work. And that's some of the story I want to quickly tell you. I've used up 20 minutes already, but I'll fly through these slides now. We brought 100 people together, some of the best designers in architecture, landscape architecture, engineering, and biology, and challenged them to redesign Los Angeles to function as watershed. Not from if we were to build the city anew, but if we were to just take it as it is today and use the economics of what we're spending today. By the way, we identified, just like that $500 million that was going to be there to fix the flood control system, around $20 billion in planned expenditures in Southern California in new water expenditures, from new wastewater, sewage treatment systems, stormwater systems, water supply systems. And we said, okay, let's spend the same money retrofitting the city and seeing if we can get better benefit. It worked. It was a 2.5-year long cost-benefit analysis. We hired the Army Corps' engineering firm to do it for us, but we gave them a different set of instructions. And they came back and said, yep, it could work. These engineers we brought together, we said, okay, redesign LA to allow us to import half the water and capture the flood water and capture the storm water and clean it, lower our energy consumption. They produced a book full of designs for retrofitting homes, properties, commercial properties, industrial properties, public land. We took one of those, a home in central Los Angeles that was our model, and we actually did a retrofit on it. And you're seeing the day we inaugurated it, we created a 1,500-year flood event by dumping 4,000 gallons of water on the house in about 10 minutes. What we did was simply put berms around the lawn, redirect the downspout from the roof drain. Used to come to the driveway. The building code in Los Angeles and most cities requires you to throw away all the water, to send it all to the streets. It's law. You can't get permission to move in when you build a house unless the engineers see that the water goes to the street. So for $4.95, we took the downspout from here and moved it into the lawn panel here. And there is, around the lawn, instead of just a lawn, there's a berm that allows water to berm up 6 inches. We put a cistern in the back along the fence line. So no water flows off the site. All the green waste is captured and used as mulch. We brought a bunch of agency people together, gave them umbrellas, and then turned on the rain. And the person who was the head of county flood control, who we had taken to court, had an epiphany on the spot. And in fact, it happens all the time. Whenever we bring a public official to the site, they always say, my God, my head is spinning. Because if you think of those two charts, they have been thinking about everything separately, and they get there, and everything integrates, and it literally makes them dizzy for a minute while their mind begins to adjust. Their stormwater problem is gone. Their flooding problem is gone. Their green waste problem is gone. And back to our mission. And this is where the Army Corps' mission started to dissolve into the new paradigm on the spot there. Because what has driven most civil engineers and most public works officials is the notion, because they got a job to do. They're held accountable if anyone's hurt from flooding. They're held accountable if the trash isn't picked up. They've always believed, because it's always been the rule, that people won't go there. Unacceptable lifestyle change. So they're not bad. They're there to save our lives. But they've been under the belief that people won't do this stuff. In fact, that people are the equivalent of infants. And so those flood control channels are like diapers, as are our landfills. Whereas if people could take responsibility, we could recycle, we could reduce our waste, we could reduce our energy use. When we held this rainstorm, this public works official who defended his storm drains with his life realized that it didn't have to be that way, that we had actually created something that people would, in fact, embrace, that was possible lifestyle change. And he called me 3 days later. He read our economic report. He looked at all the engineering, and he said, I'm sorry, we didn't understand. We think you've cracked it. And he said, what you did on that house, we need to blow up really fast, and we need to do this citywide, but I know it's going to take 50 years, but we need to start today. And we have a big problem in the San Fernando Valley. In fact, it's interesting. It's a neighborhood, artificial watershed called Sun Valley with 8,000 homes. And I understand Los Altos Hills has 8,000 residents? 8,000 something.
3,000 homes, 8,000 residents.
Ah, very good, thank you. So not dissimilar. It's 2,700 acres, 9 miles long linear, very poor community. That's very dissimilar. It's an environmental justice story, a community built for low-income wage earners for Lockheed during the war, and they didn't give them storm drains. So whenever it rains there, it floods. By the way, that's the redirected downspout. My slides are slightly out of sync. So he brought us this challenge after he saw that, and he saw one other thing we did. I want to show you the house blown up on another scale. Here are students who've learned all about watersheds, all about their role as the new managers of water and watersheds. And they took on a problem on their campus that was flooding in that, adjacent to that neighborhood. They went out and mapped it, they saw where the problems were, and they prescribed solutions. We were able to bring in resources and begin to build. This is 40 feet under their schoolyard, and those things are humans. And this is really big infrastructure. This is their dream getting manifest. These are people laying in the equivalent of what you would find under a tree, but the engineering side. This was their schoolyard when they did the investigation. This is it today. This looks like something that's using water, but now, instead of what's shedding water and polluting water, this is now part of the city's water supply system, stormwater system, flood control system. It's their green schoolyard where they get to play soccer and hopefully soon under the shade of those trees, instead of that, which is quite a health hazard. We've done this on a couple schools and plan and hope to do it on 600 more. The good news is that it's coming. Anyhow, back to the story. Carl Bloom from Public Works came to us and said, here's our flooding problem. We were going to spend $50 million to put in a storm drain to drain this from the community, because this is after any typical rain. He said, I've just killed the request for proposals to build the storm drain. We want to give your idea a try. By the way, I called it Trans-Agency Resources for Economic and Environmental Sustainability. Had to sound like trees. He renamed it A Million Cups and said, you know, if it can work, you've got our $50 million. And we held that rainstorm in August of 1998. We held the first organizing meeting for the Sun Valley watershed in November of 1998. First thing we did was an economic and a feasibility study to see if it could work. It took 2 years. The agency people studied and studied with our guidance. Some really fought it. Others started to get religion. They started to wake up. They embraced it. After 2 years, they concluded it was in fact feasible and committed to a 4-year process of redesigning that entire neighborhood as a watershed. It took 4 years, and that included an economic analysis. It ended with a 2-year environmental impact study that passed by the County Board of Supervisors. And the board also passed the whole plan, which included not a $50 million budget, but a $200 million budget. Now, why was that? Because our economic analysis, if you go back to those circles, showed just in that neighborhood that the city would save $30 million on sanitation, hauling of green waste alone. This project will put close to $200 million worth of water back in the aquifer. And interestingly enough, the numbers were real enough that the Cal-Fed Bay Delta Authority, the people working to preserve the bay here, put $1 million into the planning effort for this watershed because of the water that they believed it could save up here. So 4 days after getting approval, we began construction. So we're going to retrofit at least 4,000 of the houses with cisterns and trees and all that, but very large spaces will get more water infiltration devices. This was a park, or is a park, right in the middle of that watershed. Underneath it is getting a huge infiltration system. On top of that will be a new soccer field with lighting, so the community gets a great recreation enhancement funded by water. The work has gone on and spread. And by the way, I usually take about an hour and a half to do this presentation. I've already gone over what I promised. But the implications have been pretty extraordinary. The lessons that the county flood control people learned while they were working with us in this Sun Valley project, they began to apply to their whole agency. This same guy who we took to court, who then apologized, said, "We think you've cracked it," went on. He didn't stop there. And before he retired, he led the agency. Then he had the courage, he took the risk. He led his whole agency through a new integrated strategic plan, and flood control became the watershed management division. And then the city followed suit a year later. That is the switch from an old paradigm to the new, and they're redeploying, and it's very encouraging. The city, from the lessons it learned from this process, took on for the first time ever an integrated look at its wastewater system. Every major city in this country is required by the EPA every 10 years to come up with a wastewater master plan. The city of LA, like all other cities, had done it just sewage, because that's all that was required. This time, in partnership with us, they looked at wastewater, stormwater, and water supply. And it was a long process. It took a couple years. The cool thing is that they reached out to the community, brought together 125 stakeholders, and educated them. People from environmental groups, people from homeowner groups, but also the Building Industry Association, the Jarvis taxpayers, all the people who tend to kill bonds. And I was first a stakeholder, and then they brought me onto the consultant team, and we took everybody to that house in South Central LA. We took them all through a whole day workshop on the economics. And this group, for the first time ever, came out with a consensus that it was feasible, it made sense, and that a more expensive upfront project, and that's our challenge with sustainability, that a more expensive project up front was worth doing and should be done. And the city then went and began a process for the last 4 years, called the Integrated Resource Plan. The result of that deploys greening throughout the community, removes one whole new $4 billion sewage treatment plant from the books, and instead sees the deployment of greening throughout communities, the possible greening of hundreds of schools, and the creation of neighborhood watershed parks within walking distance of most kids in LA. That plan is now in its final EIR, and hopefully it's going to pass, and we have a mayor and a council who are more progressive than they've ever been. But what really emboldens them is what happened just 2 years ago, after most of the planning had been done. No, just a year ago, sorry. The city needed to start moving on building all this stuff because of water quality laws, and it had to meet. Are you all familiar with the term TMDLs? Some yes, some no. TMDLs, T, total maximum daily loads. It's the new implementation of Phase 2 Clean Water Act. It says every city must control about 60 different pollutants, from trash to lead to copper to whatever gets in the water supply and goes to the bay has to now be controlled, and a limit is set. Most cities are having a hard time seeing how they're going to meet those, and they're having to spend a lot of money to do it. LA is following the plan as dictated in the integrated water program that I talked about, the IRP. It knew it needed to spend a lot of money very quickly, and it needed $500 million to hit the first set of goals and constraints for trash. Zero trash in the LA River, zero trash going out to the bay. The chief administrative officer asked me if I could do with the city council what I had done with the Jarvis taxpayers, and we went around and explained and sold them, and amazingly, the city council said, okay, we'll put it on the ballot. But everyone knew it wouldn't pass. So November 2004, $500 million bond goes on the ballot, along with a police bond. People of Los Angeles came out and voted. They passed it by 78% of the vote, at a time when nobody is passing bonds. And believe it or not, the police bond failed. The water bond passed. In Latino communities, it passed by 85% of the vote. Why? Because people understood. They were part of the process. They understood what this was about. We raised literacy to some degree, and the Jarvis taxpayer group didn't mobilize against it because they had been part of the process. So there's hope. There's a whole lot of stuff going on, but what do we have to do? We've got to reach out to people and educate them. We've got to bring our communities together like never before so people understand that they are a piece of the solution. And I just wanted to share with you in parallel, I threw in these slides at the end with Hidden Villa. TreePeople has built an education center called the Center for Community Forestry. Our new mission is really to inspire the people of Los Angeles to take personal responsibility and participate in making LA a sustainable community as a model for the world. Why? Is because so many people follow us. It's not just because we have big egos. But what we need is a profound new facility to help educate, help deliver this new paradigm. And so we took our old headquarters, which was a 100-year-old fire station and with stables, and began to retrofit it to hit LEED Platinum, the highest level of sustainability measurements. This is our cistern being built. It's 250,000 gallons. This is the same size as, in terms of, it's 100 feet in diameter. So when I talked about one of those big oak trees, we're essentially creating this, but it's a little more efficient because it's not filled with soil. It's just filled with 98 pillars. So we got 250,000 gallons instead of 57,000 gallons of capacity. On top of that, we've built a very green building that's a conference center. And it's not really a conference center, it's a stakeholder process facilitation center. Don't want to lay too much jargon on you, but I tried to build the case of why that's so important. It's to build new facilities to allow us all to work together to see and manage holistically. And that is a big process. So we can webcast meetings and cablecast them so everybody can be part of the decision-making process and think whole and see whole. I want to conclude with a video that kind of sums it up. It's just 2 minutes long, and then we can throw it open for questions.
Well, still ahead on World News Tonight this Sunday, a very old idea that could revolutionize how dry states deal with drought. It's been a miserable winter in the West, the wettest season in California in more than a century. But as ABC's Judy Muller reports now, something bright has come from all those dark clouds, a revolutionary yet old-fashioned way of making use of rainwater.
In the last few weeks, Los Angeles has had more than 35 inches of rain. Most of that water has run straight down to the sea.
Los Angeles is nearly 2/3 paved. The land is sealed. So almost all the water that falls runs off. The amounts are stunning.
An estimated 80 billion gallons have been lost. For a city built in a desert that imports 85% of its water at a cost of $1 billion a year, says Andy Lipkis, that's an enormous waste.
We hemorrhage 3.8 billion gallons of water when it rains just under a half inch in Los Angeles.
His environmental group, TreePeople, has convinced the city to invest in a simple idea that goes back to the dawn of civilization. Catch the rainwater in underground cisterns. The first project, a 110,000-gallon tank at this Los Angeles elementary school, has provided enough irrigation water to transform asphalt into green playing fields.
In economic terms, we no longer have a water bill, in essence.
Trees now shade the buildings, reducing the need for air conditioning. At a dedication ceremony this past week, TreePeople demonstrated how the system works by creating their own flash flood. The water is funneled through storm drains into the cistern, where it passes through a filtration unit.
That underground treatment unit filters out this witch's brew of sediment, oil and gas, animal waste, and trash. A tanker truck comes along on a regular basis, pumps it out, and takes it away.
Those waste products would otherwise head right into the Pacific Ocean.
This creek here drains most of Los Angeles. The oceans become toxic. People get sick.
The city is looking into building more cisterns. Given that half of all the water in LA goes to lawns, a network of cisterns could save enormous amounts of money over time. Sounds simple.
If a small elementary school can do it, we have to ask ourselves, why can't a big company?
Putting away something for a sunny day. Judy Muller, ABC News, Los Angeles.
Thank you. Let me just conclude with a couple facts. The 20 billion that we found in Los Angeles, turns out nationwide cities have on the books plans to spend about 300 billion in separate water and wastewater infrastructure projects to be built as disintegrated systems. It's an incredible opportunity. We have a governor who's gearing up for a $200 billion resources bond. Right now, it is mostly designed in old, 30-year-old thinking. And fortunately, the legislators, I was up in Sacramento last week meeting with the leaders in the Senate and the Assembly, and they were quite hungry for the new integrated message. So, but this thing is moving really fast. We just have to keep our fingers crossed. Keep your eyes open and communicate that you want a system that eliminates waste and duplication, and one that really meets our future needs, just doesn't rebuild old problems. So with that, let me throw it open to you and just say thank you again for your patience with me going a little longer than just 20 minutes, and throw it open for a few questions before they pull me off. And the first hand that went up, it's right here.
I'm wondering if this, I've been hearing for years about what you're doing. I'm wondering if it's been compiled in any particular book or longer than 2-minute video.
No. I need to stop speaking and start writing, I think. Actually, the Pioneers, some of you probably were there, I spoke there, they actually produced a really fantastic half-hour radio documentary. So it's not in video, but it's in radio, and it's really good, and you can get it from the Pioneers website. But we don't otherwise have any great documentaries on this yet. In the back, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I've actually thought about a cistern out at our house because we're like, to drill a well is like 320 feet down or something. But I was just wondering some of the technical details. Maybe you've got it on your website. I had thought, okay, what happens to this water over the 6-month dry season? Does it get stagnant? Do you have to treat it to prevent it from sort of turning bad, if you will? And you know, what's the right size for a typical single-family home? Those kinds of issues. I don't know if there's a resource for sort of how to.
We have a little bit of support on our website in terms of helping you size based on the size of your roof and the amount of water you use. But so far, almost all of our deployment was about turning around 2 of the largest public works agencies in the country, and we did that. And now we've got to start filling in with how to guide people to deploy individually. There are books that you can get that talk about how you keep the water clean, keep it filtering. The cistern that we built at TreePeople is actually going to be animating a whole watershed education garden and creek. Kids are going to make it rain, and the water will come up when they pump it. They're going to make it rain and follow it through a creek that'll aerate it. But cisterns are in full use actually in the Midwest here, in countries all around the world. But City of Seattle is probably a really good resource. That's one of the only cities that we've taken the time to work with in transferring our technology. And they did it because they had needed to restore forest functionality right in the city, because all the salmon that used to spawn in the city, their habitat got wiped out. When they did what everyone thought was the wise thing at the time, they took their stormwater and put it into the sewer system because they knew it was polluted. And they didn't want to pollute the bay, but when they did that, they wiped out all the salmon spawning grounds, all the creeks in their city. And so now they've been using the same approach to restart the creeks by cleaning the water, filling with food, getting it the right temperature, and sending it back. They have started to deploy a whole set of cisterns and found that it makes economic sense for them to pay for people to install cisterns. They give it to you instead of building new sewage treatment capacity. So that's Seattle Public Utilities, if you want to get, and I can give you numbers of people there. Question here?
Well, first of all, I have a cistern at my house.
Yay.
Afterwards, talking about my experience, although I still got some of the questions you have. It's interesting, tonight in Palo Alto, there's a big meeting about the San Francisco Creek, which flows between Miller Park and Palo Alto.
Can you all hear this, by the way, or should I go?
Okay.
What creek?
The creek between Menlo Park and Palo Alto, the San Francisco Creek. I live in Menlo Park. And it floods, and there are a bunch of Palo Alto residents who are up in arms because their houses are about flooded. The 100-year floods seem to come every 10 years or so.
Yes.
So I guess the problem is a multi-city problem. And so I wondered if you had any advice about dealing in those kind of situations where you've got to really get stakeholders who've got a lot of interest and a lot of passion about this and want this solved immediately together. And also, would you come and speak in Palo Alto Park?
I am doing a few speaking engagements. I'm going to be disappearing on sabbatical in a few months for 4 months. But City of San Francisco had me up, and I've spoken in East Bay, Mud. Everyone's starting to look at this, and so and they're starting to deploy. So there's hope, and yeah, just talk to them. I've got a card here. You can find it. We're talking about a collision of two paradigms still, and you're here because you've got at least one foot, if not both, in the new paradigm, and the rest of the world is catching up, and we need to both push. And now there's a lot of opportunities, like with this new resource bond. If we let it go the way it is, we'll miss the opportunity, and billions, 200 billion will be spent, and people are going to go, sorry, there's no more money. In fact, that $220 billion in the state plan will consume all the possibility for bonds for the next 15 years in the state. So it's pretty important that we make sure this one comes out right, if it comes out. I see the possible rope. Time for one more?
One more question, and then we do have coffee and some snacks, desserts, cookies and stuff. Andy will be here for a little bit after.
Yeah, I'll be able to hang out
to chat
with
with
you.
people, so we encourage you to do that. And I think this gentleman here.
Go ahead. I was going to go back to the other side of the room.
Yeah, a lot of Los Angeles is paved because there's so many cars. When you come to equilibrium and have your ideal watershed, you'll have a lot less paving. What will you do with all those cars?
There's a lot of good quality metal and plastic in there to recycle, I think. When we started the cities, when the city started its recycling program, it didn't believe it could do it, and it believed that it would get about a 20% public participation rate, if at all. It was going to build 7 incinerators, and the citizens of South Central LA organized to stop it, and we said to the city, we can deliver you public that will participate in a system. And they didn't believe it. They looked all over the country, and guess what? San Jose and Seattle have the best curbside recycling programs in the country, but we're only getting 30% public participation. That was the max they could hope for. That was still the dominant reality of people won't go there. The city put out a request for proposals for engineering firms to build this huge, the largest curbside recycling system in the country, about 800,000 homes, a little bit less. And we, this little tree group, environmental education group, threw in a proposal that didn't meet any of their requirements. And they almost threw it away, and we went to the interview, though. And we said, look, it doesn't matter what trucks you buy, what bins you buy, it matters what happens in the home, what people choose to do with their waste, whether this system's going to work or not. And let us get our message out. And they did. So we took an environmental ed program that was reaching 30,000 kids a year, and we blew it up to 120,000 kids a year. We instituted a teacher training program. We had 2 years to get the job done before the citywide program was deployed. When we were rolling, and word was spreading, and kids were doing what kids will do, the city started to feel the heat because parents were complaining that kids were making them recycle. They begged to stop. The city told us, keep going. When that program rolled out, there was a 90% public participation rate. 90%. Knocked their socks off. It's because inspired, we enabled, we reached out to people and showed them that they could make a difference, and they kept doing it. They did the same thing with water conservation. The only way we're going to kill the car is through that same work. We need to educate and empower, and that is what tonight is about. It's what Hidden Villa is about, and environmental education programs all over. And it's not all just about the kids, but they are pretty powerful change agents. They're the ones who can imagine Disneyland-type alternative transit vehicles and embolden our city planners and our city leaders and our parents and our voters. And together we make it happen. So it's a good news message. Not that there's not a whole lot to be scared about and worried about, and not that the quality of life hasn't diminished, but there's also some reason for hope. And we need to support the teachers, and we need to support the kids and bring this home if we're going to have any hope for a future. And there is good reason to hope. And again, thank you for all being supporters of Hidden Villa or supporters of Green. Get the word out and keep up the good work. And I'll be happy to talk to you during dessert. Thank you.